Imagine eating like 6,000 calories a day, just right off the bat.
Oh my gosh, that's a lot of food.
Right. And then meticulously injecting yourself with insulin up to 10 times.
Yeah.
And then after all that, climbing into a boat to row for 6 straight hours.
I mean, it sounds physiologically impossible, doesn't it?
Totally. But imagine doing all of that, not just to survive a medical condition, but to win a 5th consecutive Olympic gold medal against literally the greatest athletes on Earth.
Yeah, and that is the actual lived reality of Sir Steve Redgrave.
Yeah.
We are talking about arguably the clearest example of sustained human commitment in the history of sports.
Without a doubt.
I mean, this is a guy who won gold in an incredibly punishing endurance sport across 5 entirely different eras of competition. So you have, Los Angeles in 1984, Seoul in 88, Barcelona in 92, Atlanta in 96, and Sydney in 2000.
That is just, it's a 20-year reign at the absolute pinnacle of human physical performance. And I mean, he added 9 World Championship golds and 3 Commonwealth Games golds to that resume too.
It's staggering.
It really is. So welcome to today's deep dive. We've got some truly fascinating source material today, and we're exploring what a boarder, a student, or, really anyone navigating a grueling long-term goal can learn from his career.
Exactly.
But what blows my mind is that before he was this knighted, undisputed champion, he was a kid that the traditional system had basically written off entirely.
Yeah, to really understand the magnitude of what he achieved, you have to look at his origins. So he was born in 1962 in Marlow, Buckinghamshire.
Okay.
And he came from a very grounded, working-class background. His dad was a carpenter and a World War II veteran, and his mom was a local bus driver.
Right, so very salt of the earth.
Exactly. And from the very beginning, formal schooling was a profound struggle for him. At age 10, he was diagnosed with severe dyslexia.
And around that same time, he failed his 11-plus exams,
I
right?
did, yeah.
Which, for anyone listening who is unfamiliar with the British education system of that era, the 11-plus was this massive, highly consequential standardized test. It essentially dictated your entire secondary education track.
Oh, absolutely. It was huge.
So failing that at 10 or 11 years old put a really heavy label on a kid.
A profoundly heavy label. I mean, he was left feeling just completely stupid and discouraged. The classroom assessments of the 1970s, they simply weren't designed for how his mind processed information. They only highlighted his deficits.
So he eventually finds rowing, channels all that academic frustration into physical power, and basically uses sheer athletic dominance to overcome his dyslexia.
It's the classic hero's journey, right? Conquering the flaw.
Well, actually, I want to stop you right there.
Oh, okay.
Because Redgrave himself explicitly hated the word overcome. He didn't conquer it, and he didn't pretend it magically vanished.
Really? He didn't see it as a past tense kind of thing. Not at all. Even much later in life, when he was discussing the prospect of reading speeches or doing public presentations, he admitted it never filled him with joy. Instead, he framed it totally differently. He said, "I have learned to work with it to the best of my ability."
Work with it? Wow. That is a much more honest framing, honestly.
It is, yeah.
It's kind of like, okay, let's unpack this. It's like trying to run an operating system on a computer that refuses to accept standard file types. You have to constantly write your own translation code just to open a basic text document.
That's a perfect analogy.
Right,
Yeah.
because it is exhausting and it takes way longer. But eventually you become a master coder while everyone else only knows how to point and click.
Exactly. That operating system metaphor is spot on because he constantly had to, as he put it, get around situations in the classroom, finding workarounds just to keep up.
Just to survive the day-to-day.
Right. And because of that, he was forced to build an incredibly high degree of mental flexibility. He developed this habit of asking, is there another way to reach this outcome?
Oh, I love that.
And that neuroplasticity, that constant forced adaptation, that became his ultimate secret weapon later on.
It really makes you wonder, how many people are sitting in traditional corporate jobs or classrooms right now feeling completely incompetent just because the environment is testing their weaknesses instead of their underlying code?
Oh, so many. We see it all the time.
But Redgrave got incredibly lucky, didn't he? Because an English teacher at his school, who also happened to be the head rowing coach, saw a physical persistence in him that all those math and reading tests completely missed.
Yeah, he found his boat, literally and metaphorically. And the lesson here for you, listening to this, is that the environment that actually reveals your capability isn't always the obvious one.
Right.
Once he was on that rowing lake, the metrics shifted entirely. From spelling and standardized testing to physical capability, biomechanics, and long-term grit.
Okay, so he finds his true environment. He leaves school at 16. He's in his element. I assume this is where we cue the inspirational montage, where he joyfully rows into the sunset every day because he just loves the water so much.
Uh, Not quite.
No.
No, the daily reality of his training is almost terrifying. From the age of 16, he committed to training sessions of 5 to 6 hours a day,
Wow.
6 days a week, 49 weeks a year. He took a full day off maybe once every 3 weeks.
Hold on, I want to push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
Because we are constantly fed this idea by modern self-help culture that you need to love the process. You hear it everywhere, right? Find your passion and you'll never work a day in your life.
Oh, yeah, the classic line.
Right. So you're telling me he maintained that punishing schedule for 2 decades, fueled by pure joy for the sport.
Actually, by his own account, he had an absolute hatred of training. He explicitly despised the daily grind.
Wait, really? He hated it?
Oh, completely.
Then how do you maintain world-class volume for 20 years if you despise the activity? That doesn't make any sense.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's because we often confuse motivation with commitment. We just assume you need to feel excited to execute a task.
Yeah, we think we need to be fired up.
Exactly. But Redgrave's story totally strips that illusion away. He trained anyway because the ultimate goal mattered significantly more than his daily emotional state. Commitment at that elite level is simply the habit of showing up without waiting for the motivation to arrive.
Wow. But if you're training through pure hatred and sheer willpower, I mean, eventually the body or the mind has to break, right? Did he ever hit a wall where willpower just wasn't enough?
He hit several, but one of the most severe physiological walls happened in 1992. Leading up to the Barcelona and Atlanta games, he was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis.
Okay, I know that's an inflammatory bowel disease, but what are the actual mechanics of that for an elite athlete? How does that impact someone sitting in a boat?
Well, ulcerative colitis causes chronic inflammation and ulcers in the digestive tract. It leads to severe abdominal pain, profound fatigue, and massive issues with absorbing nutrients.
Ouch.
Now think about the biomechanics of rowing. You are seated, bent double, using your core to generate massive, explosive power stroke after stroke.
Oh, wow. So his entire core, the exact area where this severe inflammation and pain is localized, is the central engine for his sport.
Exactly.
Every single stroke must have been just excruciating.
And that's just the physical pain. The inability to properly absorb nutrients means your muscles aren't getting the fuel they need to recover. He was managing severe flare-ups, immense pain, and sheer physical depletion.
Which completely changes the context of his 4th gold medal. I always knew about his famous quote after the 1996 Atlanta Games, but adding the ulcerative colitis and the hatred of training makes it so much heavier.
It really does.
Because he crossed the finish line in Atlanta, 34 years old, utterly spent, and a journalist asks him about the next Olympics in Sydney.
And he delivers a line that became instantly legendary in British sports.
Yeah. He looked right at the camera and said, "Anyone who sees me in a boat has my permission to shoot me."
It's just a moment of total, unvarnished exhaustion. He had reached the absolute physiological limit of what a human body and mind could endure. By any normal metric, 4 gold medals is an unparalleled triumph. He was done.
Except exactly 1 year later, he is back in the boat,
Right.
returning to that same punishing schedule.
Yep.
But the universe wasn't done throwing obstacles at him. In 1997, at 35 years old, he gets hit with another massive medical diagnosis, type 2 diabetes.
And what is crucial to understand here is that there was absolutely no medical precedent for this. No one in elite endurance sports had this diagnosis at his level. He was in entirely uncharted territory.
Hold on, I need to clarify something. When we hear type 2 diabetes, we usually associate it with a sedentary lifestyle or like a poor diet. How does an Olympic athlete rowing 370 kilometers a week develop type 2 diabetes?
It's a really great question. While lifestyle is a major factor for the general population, strong genetic predispositions combined with the immense chronic physical stress of extreme elite training can also trigger it.
So the training itself contributed.
Yeah, the body is under so much sustained stress that the pancreas simply stops producing enough insulin or the cells become resistant to it. So, initially, he followed the standard medical advice for a new type 2 diabetic, which was to significantly reduce his calorie and carbohydrate intake.
Which makes logical sense for a normal person trying to manage blood sugar spikes. But I'm guessing for a guy who needs 6,000 calories a day just to physically power his workouts, That protocol was a disaster.
A complete disaster. To understand why, you have to look at what insulin actually does. Insulin is basically the key that unlocks your cells to let glucose in for energy.
Right.
Without it, you just have sugar floating uselessly in your bloodstream, causing damage while your muscles literally starve. When he cut his calories, his energy levels completely crashed.
I mean, obviously.
You cannot fuel 370 kilometers of rowing a week on a reduced calorie diet. His body began shutting down. He couldn't train.
So he's looking at the definitive end of his career. The standard medical route doesn't work for his specific physiological reality.
This is where that mental flexibility we talked about earlier kicks in. The kid who had to write his own operating code to get through a dyslexic childhood now had to write an entirely new medical protocol to get through his training.
Oh, that's such a great parallel.
He couldn't conquer the diabetes. He had to figure out how to work with it.
And the mechanics of how he did this are mind-boggling. Here's where it gets really interesting. To maintain his world-class performance, he went back to consuming 6,000 calories a day. But to manage the massive blood sugar spikes from that huge intake, he had to manually inject himself with insulin 8 to 10 times every single day.
Think about the logistical nightmare of that. Managing blood sugar is basically a high-stakes, real-time math problem.
Yeah, it sounds terrifying.
When you row for hours, your blood sugar naturally drops. But if you inject insulin, it drops further. If it drops too low while you're in the middle of a lake, you experience hypoglycemia, you can pass out, or worse.
So he had to structure those 10 daily injections meticulously around his meals and his brutal training sessions.
Exactly.
The mental load of doing that math while your heart rate is maxed out is insane.
Yeah.
But his mindset was incredibly clear. He said, I decided very early on that diabetes was going to live with me, not me live with diabetes.
And that shift in perspective is the critical takeaway. When faced with a massive hurdle, the instinct is to ask, can I continue? Redgrave asked, how do I need to change my approach so I can continue?
Wow.
He didn't ask for the obstacle, but he refused to let it dictate his destination.
And that reframing is exactly what gets him to the starting line in Sydney in 2000.
Yeah.
He's 38 years old, managing ulcerative colitis, managing type 2 diabetes, doing up to 10 injections a day. And he crosses the finish line to win his 5th Olympic gold medal. The source material describes him completely collapsing in the arms of his teammate, Matthew Pinsent. That moment was later voted the greatest British sporting moment of the 20th century.
You know, you just brought up Matthew Pinsent, and we really need to dig into that partnership because it is so easy to fall into the lone wolf trap when we look at stories of extreme achievement.
Oh, for sure. We love that narrative.
We imagine this solitary titan conquering the world through sheer isolated willpower. But that completely ignores the reality of how these medals were won.
Yeah, the lone wolf narrative looks great on a motivational poster, but it's rarely the truth. That 5th gold in Sydney, he didn't win it in a single scull. It was a coxless 4.
Which requires an incredibly complex team dynamic.
Wait, for the non-rowers among us, let's explain the mechanics of this. Coxless means there is no coxswain sitting in the back steering the boat and shouting orders, right?
That's right.
So how do 4 guys who are facing backwards and rowing at maximum physical capacity actually steer the thing down a straight 2,000-meter lane?
That is the beauty and the terror of the event. One of the rowers actually steers the boat using a hidden mechanism attached to their foot connected to the rudder.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, it requires an unbelievable amount of unspoken synchronization. You can't just overpower the guy next to you because in sweep rowing, you only have one oar. If one side pulls even a fraction of a second early, the boat veers off course or loses its glide. You have to match your teammates perfectly.
And Redgrave's previous golds in Seoul, Barcelona, and Atlanta were won in pairs, primarily with Matthew Pinsent. They had a 16-year partnership that is basically legendary in the sport.
They were the ultimate study in cognitive diversity. They were total opposites in almost every conceivable way.
How so?
Well, you have Redgrave, the son of a working-class carpenter, went to a comprehensive state school, heavily dyslexic, intensely private, with what he himself called a difficult competitive ferocity.
And then you have Pinsent, an Oxford-educated vicar's son, highly articulate, very analytically minded. It's kind of like being assigned a massive group project, and your partner operates on a completely different frequency. You don't even speak the same social language.
Observers at the time noted that they shared absolutely nothing in common except a love of rowing. But what's fascinating here is that difference was exactly why they were unbeatable.
Really?
Yeah. In high-stress environments, a team composed of identical thinkers is mathematically inferior. They share the same blind spots. Under pressure, they will make the same mistakes.
Oh, that makes so much sense. So Redgrave brought the sheer physical power and that relentless, borderline irrational drive.
Hmm.
And Pinsent brought the analytical precision and the capacity to regulate performance under extreme pressure.
Exactly. They didn't duplicate each other. They filled in each other's gaps.
But to sustain a 16-year partnership under that much scrutiny, I mean, that requires a massive subordination of individual ego.
It does. You have to practice the daily reality of working alongside someone whose strengths and weaknesses you know intimately and who knows yours just as well.
It completely reframes how we should look at collaboration. You don't have to be best friends with the people you work with. But whether you're navigating a corporate office, a shared boarding house, or a creative project, you have to be willing to contribute your unique strength and honestly admit what you lack.
Absolutely.
True partnership isn't about compromising your individual achievement. It's recognizing that relying on someone else's diverse skill set is the only way to reach your highest potential. Redgrave simply does not win those later goals without Pinsent in the boat.
That is the core synthesis of everything we've looked at today. Life, learning, long-term career goals, these are not short sprints. They are sustained journeys.
Right.
And they are shaped by ordinary, deeply unglamorous daily decisions. Choosing to show up when you despise the task, adapting your approach when your body or your environment throws a massive wall in front of you, and subordinating your ego to honor your commitments to the people in your boat.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Most of you aren't going to be asked to inject insulin 10 times a day, manage a chronic bowel disease, and row 370 kilometers a week. Thank goodness.
Yeah, hopefully not.
But your own version of that boat is waiting for you. It asks you to practice that exact kind of endurance when the initial excitement fades, and you just have to rely on the daily habit of showing up.
And I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder that wasn't strictly discussed in our breakdown today, but it really stems from the text. We spend a lot of time trying to hide or eliminate our limitations. But what if the things we view as our greatest weaknesses are actually the prerequisites for our greatest achievements?
Oh, wow. What do you mean by that?
Think about the timeline of his life. If Steve Redgrave had an easy time in school, if his brain processed information exactly the way the 1970s academic system wanted it to, he would have passed his 11-plus exams.
Right, he would have fit right in.
He likely would have gone down a very comfortable, conventional path. He probably never would have picked up an oar to prove his worth. The obstacle was the catalyst.
The failure was completely necessary.
Are the obstacles currently frustrating you? A learning difference? A difficult diagnosis? Or a rigid system that tells you aren't a fit? Actually, the exact tools you need to build the mental flexibility for your own future gold medal.
So if you feel like you are being forced to write your own operating code right now, maybe it's not a disadvantage at all. Maybe you're just building the flexibility that will eventually make you unstoppable. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Keep exploring, keep showing up, and we'll catch you next time.